This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
What is up, guys? Super excited today. Have a show. We're going to talk about what your shadow is. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to get into starting a company and what that looks like. And my guest today is Vinnie Fisher. Vinnie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Yeah, and you, one of the things I saw in your bio is, and I'm going to turn listeners off right away, but I want you to speak to this if you don't mind. You were a lawyer by trade, and you did tax and business law?
Yeah, I'm actually still a licensed attorney. I don't hold myself out for practice in the sense of hiring my time, but I'm a corporate M&A business attorney with a specialty in tax. That's correct.
So, when you look at attorneys, in general, and we've all, as business leaders, we've all hired them. There's a need for that. How do you look at like an attorney and being an attorney, and what do you advise to attorneys, and then it's kind of like still keeping your soul at the same time, if you know what I mean?
Interestingly, like we all are technicians in something that we do. We're all professionals. And so the professional who's trained in the system of government that we operate, the operation and rule of law is what a lawyer is, right? And so like any profession, it runs the spectrum of how someone feels about that professional. And all the way back to the days of Shakespeare teasing about lawyers and all the things. And, I have better lawyer jokes than most people. And I would say this, I am massively honored to be a lawyer. I love knowing and understanding the rule of law. And as a people group, the profession, I love a vast majority of the people and lawyers who take the professionalism of being a lawyer massively serious. Now, it's hard, no different than any other profession. But what's also different is I'm vastly different than a lot of my colleagues in the sense that he or she are trained to be in the active representation of other people. I left that to be in my entrepreneur career, but my advice to other lawyers, actually, we talk a lot. I love to be in collaboration with counsel and lawyers. They're some of my favorite people to be around because they're technicians who understand what I like to be technical about. As it relates to the community, and my advice to counsel is no different than hiring a therapist or the right pastor in your life. It's relationship more than it is anything else. And so being able to rely on someone's advice in my instance, requires relationship. And so there's so many ingredients to making a relationship work, but that's another set of questions. But to put a bow on that answer, I'd say that if you look back to my answer, it's a wonderful profession. And there's a lot of guys and gals who are trained in being risk adverse in that profession.
So you were in 2007, you were looking at a situation that you had in the sense of here you're a lawyer. I would assume by talking with you, you were doing well. And then this little bug begins to hit you called being an entrepreneur. Can you kind of go through the process of how that happened? And then, when did it hit you specifically?
Probably started when my brother broke his arm and lost his paper route. And then I actually stepped in and took it over and actually did it better. And I realized that if I just did the job even a little better than the next guy or the guy previously, that people would be willing to pay me for it. And so all of a sudden something kicked in long before that. I actually owned my own law firm. And at the same time, I was in business where we opened up a series of special education opportunities. One was for high school, another one was for adult education. So I had already been entrepreneurial in addition to my law firm. So I would say that I had a desire to execute on ideas that I've always had. I've been a problem solution type person and take advantage of those opportunities in front of me. What happened in 2007 was actually a client who was referred to at the time by my CPA, came in and needed corporate work. And it was this young whiz bang internet kid. And we struck a hit, a relationship almost from hour one. And I was intrigued by an area called the digital online world. I knew nothing about it. And then that spurred a whole series of my life over the last 13 years, which we can get into, which would then transitioned me out of the active practice law and into operating a series of businesses that I even have some today, where I lead from non-practice of law.
Yeah, and during this time, like you had said, you started this vocational services to adults with development disabilities, and it was called the Creative Learning Workshop. What I mean, whenever people think, because this is something I always like to ask entrepreneurs, whenever you're thinking of creating something in new space, because I mean, there's nothing there. If you look at space in general, it's just this company had never been created before, and then all of a sudden here you are, an attorney, then you're looking at this, this is your first venture, this creative learning workshop. What led you to the point to want to build something that would help people with development disabilities and these services?
Yeah. So, what's funny is I see a problem and a solution. I didn't I wasn't raised in special education. Wasn't raised around autism or any of the spectrum of low and high functioning. I was representing, my law firm was representing mental retardation, developmental disability facilities, MRDD facilities where adult people lived. And at the time, we had a law dispute about privatization versus public in the state of Ohio and providing certain services. Well, my firm got involved in forming parts of that law. Well, in the process of that, I saw a real opportunity and raised my hand and said, "Why don't we do it?" It wasn't like this. I saw the need, I saw the opportunity, and I dove in. Like I'm the guy that dives off the cliff and evaluates the parachute halfway down.
That's an entrepreneur right there.
And which is unusual of a lawyer. It really is. Like when I sit with my colleagues and we talk about things and we love life, I always get the question of someone's like, "Oh, I always wanted to do that. How did you do that?" I have a desire to take risk that most people don't have. And it's not to say one person is doing it right or one's doing it wrong. My huge thing to step back and look at is I've just always come at things like there's a problem, and most of the problems are right in front of me, and I work at a solution. And so instead of dreaming about some idea or having ideation, I've been really blessed with active activity. I actually execute and take risk on the idea and I bring it to life. To me, the ability to push through and do something and take that risk and not see failure as a destination, but as an opportunity to learn, I think is the biggest difference between people with ideas and people who execute on them.
No, I love that. When you're talking about taking risk, before we get into your first internet company, when you're talking about taking risk, is there a process that you evaluate on that? Are you going, by just right brain fully, or how do you look at when you decide to take risk?
It's changed. I see the seasonality of the way we grow, and I see business in seasonality, and I've learned to look at life in like these 5-year chunks. There's first and second half of those seasons, 2-3 years going. If you were to ask me that question, Jason, like back then, it was like, I'm taking advantage of an opportunity. I'm just going to try it and I'll figure it out later. I was a little less filled with wisdom in my guesses. Now I just have a little bit more wisdom in my guesses. Right. But at the core of it, I was always struggling with a value proposition. Is there something I can solve that's a problem for me that may even be a problem for somebody else that someone's willing to pay me for? That was usually the start of everything. And the simpler I could say it, the simpler I can think about it, and the simpler I could execute it, it usually led to something actually having a better chance of coming out of the gates successful.
No, I love that. So here you are, and it's 2007, and you're looking at, you met this person, and you're like, internet-based companies. Okay, What was it because of the did you create this partnership with this, young guy? What was that process when you thinking like, oh wow, there's this whole new world that's open up to me where we can, start these, internet companies?
So so he's in my office and he's there for like his entire operations are a disaster. He's a young kid. He's super smart at like customer and copy and engagement of the consumer. Still to this day, one of the people in my life I respect with customer engagement at any level. But here he is sitting in my office and he starts using words like domain name and URL and how to do a digital e-learning book and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And then he slid over his bank statements and I was in love immediately. I was like, whoa. And so at that stage, to be honest with you, I was just intrigued. It was like, holy cow, there's another way to do business. And I don't know, I liked him. And then what from him I liked was an opportunity where I could help him and make it better. And then all of a sudden, like that journey was like, whoa, I see a whole new category. So I'd say that first thing was jumping on an opportunity.
Yeah. How did you, is it something that you trust, like your instinct or gut, whenever you decide to go in partnership with somebody? Because I know there's, I've had them, and I know a lot of people that listen have had failed partnerships. How do you approach that process?
Hey, listen, I've had him too. And, he and I are no longer partners. We're friends. We've endured things where we constantly disappointed each other and let each other down. I'm thankful, when I look at my marriage, it's a partnership, right? And we've endured 25 years. And I think that, in my marriage, I'm not looking for happiness. Deb and I are each striving for holiness. And so in a partnership that's business related, sometimes I think, we look for external things from them. It can be transactional and there's a relationship deficit. And so I don't know. I think we all have those. We get into, sometimes we chase an idea instead of who we're doing it with. And so I think, so when I look at some of my partnerships that didn't go well, it was the idea, not the person. Right. And
Mhm.
so who you're doing it with is massively more important than what you're doing.
I love that, because no matter how good of a partner you have, and you're so true on that, it's the idea. If you have a bad idea, or like you said, it doesn't have a good value proposition, it's not gonna work regardless of who your partner is.
Yeah. Right. You can have the
So
greatest partner in the world with a really bad idea, and all you're going to have is a great partner and no business.
yes, exactly. So did that begin to start kind of, you guys opened up that business, and I know you had opened up Brain Host and Purely Hosting and freewebsite.com,
Yep.
and all these different hostings and solutions. So is that what led you? Was there a process between from 2007 to 2014? What were you learning in that process before you finally opened Fully Accountable?
You know, I learned some massive things of what not to do as well. I I have ideas every morning, Jason. I
Mm.
have I have excellent executable ideas every day. And the problem was in my immaturity in leadership and just enough money in my pocket, I would go try them all. And instead of learning to say no, or no, not right now, or it's not the right timing, even though it's a good idea, I woke up with 7 businesses that I was pulling levers on and operating. So I learned that businesses need to have a dedicated operator, and that operator need not be me. And that I'm better off helping to develop and grow that operator. I learned that this idea of side hustles are extremely dangerous and can be a distraction to growing something valuable. I learned that it's more important to be developing people than it is process, but process is so important to good people. I learned that I can be blinded by my arrogance. I learned that if I don't share my shortcomings, I can't empower the people around me to grow something bigger than my shadow. And I learned that my shadow casts a large net over the company. And what am I doing to grow beyond that?
So when you use the word shadow, what are you, so that the listeners understand in particular, what are you, because you've used this several times and I wanted to get in this with you because this was in an email that you sent over. When you use the word shadow, what are you describing as yourself with the shadow?
Yeah, I have a gift for your listeners too, and they can find it in the show notes at fullyaccountable.com/ABQ. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, I actually wrote a book called The CEO's Mindset, where I really dive into this whole concept and deeply. And I triple dog dare you to just go ahead, and my team will send you a loving gift, and you'll get our other best-selling book, and along with it, and other materials. So we would love you to have that. No strings attached, other than you have to take some effort to go get it. Now, back to the whole idea of a shadow. I, I'm massively passionate. I can be passionate about the leaves changing or a bowel movement. And so I just have a high energy output. That's just way I've been built. And, when I could get passionate about something, I'm running downhill fast. And so I have a big footprint in all of the stuff that I touch and do. And so when I was running BrainHost before we launched freewebsite.com, I had hundreds of people in the building. We have massive amounts of revenue. I was fighting every day with GoDaddy for the most signups. We were like the seventh largest shared web hosting company on the planet. We were taking some numbers, man. We were doing it. And in the process of all that, we sat down as a board, which I was an active member of my own board. And we decided that why don't we hand off the running of this business to someone else? And I go focus on launching free website. And in the arrogance of all that, we broke it. And we exposed how many levers I was pulling, and it was a disguised vision of me growing levers. So and the guy that I handed it to, good guy, wrong spot for time in his life, and another layer of problem. My problem, I didn't invest in growing him. I bailed on it, and all of a sudden, we take this mid-figure, eight-figure company with like people wanting to buy it, and we broke it. When we say I broke it with blindness and arrogance to all of the levers I was pulling. And so it's the best thing that ever happened to me in business that we broke that thing, sold it for parts. And I realized that like there is a critical component to recognizing some leadership elements that are so important to business. I would have never learned it, at least through that season of my life, had that not happened.
Now, when you said you were inventing levers, not only were you pulling levers, you were inventing levers. Because I picture, like Wizard of Oz and the wizard
Yep.
in the back behind the curtain pulling all the levers. What do you mean inventing levers?
Well, so at the time, we take for granted now these flat websites that are inside of a web builder. Well, that technology didn't exist. And so one day I sat down with my partner and joked, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we could deliver on-demand 4-page flat sites that people could just have? And we neither he or I are techie, we dreamt that up. And now everyone takes the tech that we started to build and uses it as a foregone conclusion. The first days of the cloud, no such thing existed. I jokingly was playing table tennis at a large affiliate conference and with another web hosting company guy, and said, wouldn't it be cool if we could use the speed of a server to spin up something separate from the one that people use it to run what they already have? And literally,
Wow.
the light bulb in his mind kicked on, and we created what looks like today's version of the cloud. And these are things you're just making up. Well, tech allowed us to be super creative, or the lack of it. And so those levers were also needing to be pulled. And so what you don't know is once we made up that idea, we have 3,000 people in the queue that needed those websites. Our offer exploded. And so every day we're building stuff. Well, if I'm not helping lead people basically through the desert because they're blind or frozen and overwhelmed by our massive growth, how do you grab a rocket? Anywhere you can get your hand on it. Well, I was leading everyone through that. And when I stepped out of it and saw the leadership deficit, now looking back, I wasn't developing a layer underneath me, a following of people who get it. I literally relied on the idea and didn't build out process with good people.
No, I love that when you said grabbing a rocket. And, when you do have success and you're just trying to react to everything instead of be proactive, in that process of trying to hold on to this rocket, as because I can imagine this in my head, and then being ultra creative, do you feel like a mistake was made because you were pulled in so many directions, so you just had one arm on the rocket instead of both? What do you think caused your ability? Because you seem to be hugely creative. I mean, and like you said, you're thinking of new ideas every day. How do you focus?
Yeah. So first off, let me answer your first question, because your second question on focus is going to be part of the answer. And your first question was, what mistakes? And so mistake in my mind, just so you know, from accountability, are just bad decisions.
Right.
And one of the immature, ignorant, bad decisions I was making is I had a lot of ideas. I led us in bad directions. I'm the one who's on this list famously for overpaying for a domain name. And I'm ranked worldwide for amount of money I spent on a domain name. You can look it up. It's a fun, bad fact. I did that. And I led us in all these directions. So when I look at like all these pulling in directions, I have to be honestly look in the mirror and say, man, I created most of our distractions, and some of our good ideas, most of them actually are good ideas, and they are also equally distractions against what you're doing. And so how do I focus? I've learned that my ideation has to stay at my level. I have a black book sitting right in front of me for the couple ideas that have popped in my head while you and I are talking. And I could be real about real time of that. And I have to be very careful about sharing my ideas with my operating team because they don't think like I do. And when I look at all the stuff, I can think of meetings where I've walked into where I have an idea and people are leaving that meeting going, do we have a new job? Are we doing something brand new, or are we going to continue most people do not act that way. I'm the problem, not them.
No, and I think this is a big issue with creative people, and I love that you brought this up. And this will go into leadership and shadow work, but
Yeah.
whenever you're looking at being so creative, I mean, on the spectrum of 1 to 10, you're at a 9 or a 10, and then being able to relate with people that are executing and operating. It seems like through your wisdom, you used that word earlier, you've learned to be able to understand and communicate, because I've talked to a lot of business leaders, business owners, and if they're on that creative side, and many of them are, then they're just, it's almost bipolar the way that another leader that may be a little bit more logical in their thought process are saying, like, what is he going to come up with today? What's going to happen? And like you said, is my job changed? How do you prevent that when you go into a meeting? Or when you get an idea and you're so excited about something, how do you share that with your team?
So I'll tell you, I'm going to give you the biggest weapon that I triple dog dare everyone to go read the first chapter of CEO's Mindset. It's so important to me. I named the book after the first chapter, and the light bulb moments for me as a leader are there. And here's a big one. If you're creative, you're a quick start, you like see ideas and it requires your energy to make it come to fruition. Well, somewhere you're going to have to get comfortable with the gap between you and the people on your team. And so for me, I call it the 70% rule. I use it for lots of things, but for this person, this purpose, here's what it looks like. I had to get comfortable with the difference between the way I would do it versus someone else would do it. And I had to get comfortable and say to myself, okay, if they did it 70% like I did it, can I live with that? And I had to learn how to live with that gap. If I didn't, I couldn't grow something beyond my shadow. And so I really started to actually invest in people. And I learned some people like to manage, and some people like to be technicians, and others do creative stuff. And so this idea of roles and what role you should be in, I realized real along the journey of that, after breaking a whole bunch of things, that it's so critical to recognize that give someone room to be able to critically think. And if I hold them to the standard of what I expect for myself, then I'm never going to give them the room to grow inside that gap. And so when I started doing that, analogies like not being the lightning bolt and take down the tree, or massively disrupt something because something didn't go exactly right, or fill in every blank you can there, is the issue of the leader who's a quick start creative person. And so once I divorced or separated those two things, next thing you know, I look to have managers be the COOs of our companies. I look to always be involved in execution on mission and ideation of development of creation of strategy. But I don't come in and I work really hard to not massively disrupt what's actually working. I've learned, honestly, how to deal with two emotions. Emotion number one being anxiety, and emotion number two being boredom. And it's not that those don't exist for an entrepreneur, it's how you respond to them. And quite often, what I would do to create an idea or execute on something was a response to either anxiety or a boredom.
No, I think that's good. And you said that you can, and with creative people, I see this is that you can, being one myself, you can break things. And one of the things that I thought of is not only break things, but you can break people.
Oh, yeah.
And you had talked about one of the things that you learned in that process of those 7 years is developing people. And I know with this wisdom that you have now and growing as a leader, when you look at breaking people, or you look at taking the time to develop someone, not look at them as like a widget to grow your idea, or I need this person to execute, how do you look at someone as a human, and not, I've watched several interviews with Elon Musk, and he's just so far. I mean, he's take all of our brains and 10x it, and he's that execution engineer guy. And it's like, how does he relate with his employees being, having that gap of creativity and distance? So how do you do that with your employees so that you don't break them?
I'm thankful that I really care about people. And so I inherently believe in people over process. And there are
Mhm.
people who believe in the process over people, right? And you can hear that in their language patterns. So I want to be fair to everyone listening that I really inherently like people. And I'm thankful for having that. But I will tell you this, even during any phase of growth of a business, you start liking an idea and you look at the output to the consumer and the prospect, and you can lose sight of the people doing it. And so our biggest asset is our people, not the clients we have, not the revenue we have. And in order to actually have that perspective, like in order to see the value in your organization, you can have two perspectives. Relationship can either be transactional or it can have a relationship component of love. And as soon as I started focusing on my people and I brought love, and guys hate that word because it requires intimacy. But if you can have love for your people, they can do so much more for your clients, consumers, and prospects than you could ever do by yourself.
So I know like what you just said, and practicing servant leadership and understanding that, in my own life, looking at love and trying to be the alpha male entrepreneur CEO. What are some ways that you can learn love or display love to your employees?
I think you got to have love in order to give love.
Mm.
I actually, through all those things I broke, and again, you want to read my books, you're going to discover some of the worth things. Like I got in my own head when I broke it, right? I broke a big company, a bigger company than most people will ever have a shot at growing. And I got in my head, I'm like, was I a one hit wonder? And all of a sudden, my own view of myself of shame, embarrassment, like I literally had awful view. I couldn't even forgive myself. I had this trap of all these wounds. Well, if you can't accept love, it's going to be really hard to actually give it. And so
Yes.
the journey of internally working on like that was so, but I'll tell you right now, I'm at the best level of leadership. Anyone around me will tell you, we have multiple companies, we have multiple COOs. Even though I have one operating company that I stick myself as the CEO of, I have a portfolio of companies, but people will tell you I'm a leadership developer. And what I've learned is doing the internal work and dealing with my wounds and all these things is a component of love, building that back into relationship, and how that has absolutely, for me, what's important for me is who I follow impacts how I lead.
Yes, I agree 100%. And having that ability to be able to, I know you had mentioned that you've been married for 25 years. Congratulations.
Thanks, bud.
How important is it with having you as a leader in your home and displaying that when you're looking at, having that same leadership to your employees? Because we always have, as entrepreneurs, we always try to separate the two. How have you learned over time to, incorporate that love that you have for your family and bring it into your employees and your businesses?
I think perspective is a funny thing as you get older and look back at certain things, and you lack decision abilities or wisdom. And you know, you people, men, women alike, can have this backwards in either direction. You could love what you're doing to solve a problem, and you could not invest back in the family, or vice versa. And a house that's not on a firm foundation will crumble. And I had to go back. This all started for better at work when I had to get right with my family. I had to look at my children and seek reconciliation on how I went all deep on business and lost leadership at a time inside my family. And when I did that, when I got right with some of those things, because I'm not trying to live two lives, it's not an either or scenario for me. It's both. I didn't have to try to live two lives, and I was able to be free with the things that I wasn't doing well. And I created an environment both in my home and in our workplace where people can share their offenses, and we can deal with things, and we can do life together, because I just chose relationship over transactions.
I love that. That's so. I think being honest with yourself is important, as you had said. So, 2014, you got the entrepreneurial bug again, and you opened Fully Accountable. Can you go into a little bit of what Fully Accountable is and how it can help out business leaders?
Yeah. So, Fully Accountable is a fractional CFO and controller service that provides a full back office on an outsourced fractional basis for e-commerce and digital companies that are doing seven figures in revenue and above. And what we do is we run the entire accounting and finance department, do the work for high transaction companies. And so how that started was inside of my health supplement company. I had a problem. I had all these people running around. We were doing a lot of revenue. We had a couple famous products. So we were doing great. And no one could tell me what it cost to acquire the customer. We had a very old process of accounting. Technology didn't exist. Here we were again on the front edge of no technology. Now, today you can connect to your bank directly and you can do all these things, and we've automated certain parts of it and tech's catching up. Well, that wasn't true in 2014. So we had to go build out something that didn't exist. And we started doing this for ourselves. Next thing you know, I realized one of the major problems I had in business is I was always focused on gross revenue and not on net revenue. I'd have these great months where we put millions of dollars through the door, and I'd have razor thin money left at the bottom. I'd have this massive leaky bucket, and I had this awful relationship to the bottom line. Well, that changed in this process. I started to actually be a defender of the bottom line by realizing there was one. And a simple thing hit me that's so simple, but changed it all for business for me. It is what I keep at the end, not how much I make at the beginning. And that changed it all. I actually ended up writing a book about it called False Profits, which you can have for free. And it is this journey for me about solving a problem I had. Well, gosh darn it. Here I was, this massively successful guy having high transaction businesses, all of a sudden on a simple, hard idea that was go ahead and do a service job to solve a problem. And people were like, you're going to open a boring accounting firm? Well, here we are 6 years later, the largest in our space doing what we do. And people want to look at us like an overnight success, building a really hard service company. But we set out to solve a problem.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I like the idea, especially with tech companies having that ability to have, because I know you have like fractional shares you can buy on jets and different things like that. What gave you that idea to say, oh, okay, on the CFO side of things, or bookkeeping, accounting, what if we offered this to a company that's starting out, or like a new tech company or any business? What gave you the idea to do the fractional part?
So, I'd hire a CFO, and, even the one who's my partner in Fully Accountable, let's go back to when I hired him. I hired him thinking I didn't realize at the time there are multiple positions in an accounting department. There's a bookkeeper. If you have high transactions, you have a data analyst, you have a controller who's the actual accountant quarterback. And then you got this executive CFO guy who kind of is above the work. Well, what most people do, we have a very small budget in small companies, is we hire someone and expect them to do all of that. Well, along the way, I'm like, holy cow, I realize that all these positions exist. And I'm like, most businesses need a piece of a CFO. They don't need them there full time. They only need a little bit of them. Businesses need this work done. And so what can I do to impact someone's time for money with a fraction of the cost with a lot more resources? And literally, I was like, holy cow, they only need a piece of this. But if it was done by an expert, well, it would massively impact the business. And that's how that came about.
I love that. And at the this is crazy. At the same time, you're writing your first book. So you're launching this company and then you're writing a book. And it is the best investment, a better you. What decided you, I mean, is it all these ideas that were coming out and the things that you were learning from? What decided for you to become an author?
That book, the title of it, before I even knew I was writing of it, came to me in the shower. And I'm like, that's supposed to be the title, huh? I'm like, huh. Literally 6 weeks later, with a yellow legal pad, I wrote every word to that book. It bled out of me. It actually was a journey back into self-worth and about the value of me and how I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. It's actually what turned the light bulb back on in my life. And so that book was part of a healing process. The next two books were ones of journey on business. That first one, though, man, was a really a self-love kind of worth thing that came out of me. And I just publicly shared it with the world.
I love that. Because that's something that we had talked about, before the show, being vulnerable and in this best investment, a better you. If you don't mind, kind of giving a brief synopsis on what you feel that entrepreneurs and leaders, are doing or aren't doing to be the best that they can be.
It is so lonely leading from the front of the room. Today, there are two downward pressures that happen to all professionals. With today's demand, you're always expected to be right and you're always expected to be available. Well, entrepreneurs have that same thing. We're always expected to be the ones leading, that we're right. So people know and they trust what you're doing and they follow you even off a cliff. And we're always expected to be available. Well, those two pressures are so massively overwhelming that there's this entrepreneurial gap. I set out, I had gained a bunch of weight in the process of running that hosting company and into our digital publishing firm. And I was set out to lose 25 pounds. And in the process, I only lost 20. Well, I saw myself as a massive failure for not hitting 25 as opposed to celebrating 20. Well, that's the gap that I think entrepreneurs live in when we fall short of some expectations. We can't celebrate that we had this great journey. I was so stuck in the future of where I wanted it to be, I lost any relationship to the current and present.
No, but I mean, I think this is really important because why don't we as leaders allow ourselves to give ourselves credit? Do you know what I mean?
Yep, because we have a really hard time celebrating the wins. I actually think I'm gifted with a generous heart. I give. Somebody really nailed me once and said, Vinny, you're a terrible receiver. You don't receive compliments. You don't receive stuff. And and this guy was such a kind person in the way he delivered it to me. And he said, if you could learn to receive, I suspect you're going to find more joy in giving. And he hit me. And so little things like when someone's like, oh, that's a nice shirt, I would say, oh, you mean this old thing? Or, hey, like I would completely deflect
Yeah.
it. And I was not a good receiver. And it was a vision of the worth I had in myself and the shame and the stuff. And, I was performing as a kind of a way to like, hey, I've got what it takes. I had this chip on my shoulder. In spite of how I feel about myself, I can succeed. And so one of the problems with being able to stop and celebrate is I don't feel good about where I'm at. So how can I get to a place where I can feel good about where I'm at and still strive for more? And that journey is what led to all that.
That is such gold what you just said, because a lot of times we get to the point, and I know from my life too, it's like I always want to do that next thing because if I'm always thinking future and always thinking that next thing, then I don't have to deal what's in front of me. And so I can almost go into like fairyland, if you want to call it this dream world where I don't have to deal with the reality of the things that are actually happening right now.
So one of the things we built in our company at Fully Accountable is a thing called benchmarks. And benchmarks were a way to evaluate what you did today, yesterday, last week, last quarter, last year against yourself and against competitors. And that birthed out of something that I learned to do as a future thinker, someone who's always stuck in the future, is I learned to actually voice out thankfulness, what I'm grateful for. And
Hmm.
what I started doing was, what are three things in my life that look backwards that I'm thankful or grateful for? And benchmarking is just a perspective to do that. That same thing happened in my life. Instead of always living in the future, what are some things that I can stay grounded in today in order for me to do that as someone who's always kind of in advance? Was I literally had to stop and find three things a day that I was grateful for. And gosh darn it, it really truly helped me find a place or a foothold in the journey of today and not so burdened that it's not tomorrow. Now, don't get me wrong, Jason. I am always living in wanting to go faster than anybody else, but I found this cadence to also enjoy what we're doing.
Yeah, and you had said something, not just exhibiting this gratefulness and putting it out every day and having this attitude of gratitude, but looking at yourself and being comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
Because I want to get into CEO's mindset here in a minute, but when you said that, it resonated with me. Like, I can't take a compliment. I can't do this because I don't mind giving somebody else a compliment. But why is it so hard for leaders and entrepreneurs to accept that and have humility?
Because the world has this downward pressure and they create things like, fake it till you make it, or work out kick your coverage, or do something more than you already are. And all of a sudden, the person that I can give the most benefit of the doubt to, me, is also the person I'm the hardest on, me. And so in that whole dual relationship, I still have a history. I have a memory. I have things where I've let people down, including myself. I've lied. I've deceived. I've manipulated. I've hurt. I've caused pain. So I have this quotient of shame on myself. And all of a sudden, if I let that be the theme in my head and my heart, it's going to dictate what I do.
Yeah, and that's so true. And it's being. I just had this conversation with someone yesterday where we were talking about integrity, and then leading with integrity, and honestly, what that looks like individually in each person's life.
Yeah, that's huge. To me, the journey that I've been on is internal, and I think the more that leaders can work on finding peace and joy, and finding things that are how you feed your soul, it's
Hmm.
going to deal with so many other categories. And so for me, it's probably clear to listeners that my faith in Christ is important to me. And so I've learned the following of him. Even if you don't believe in him as a Lord, you can see his principles. And so there is this whole journey that learning how to feed your soul. Once I filled up my bank account, my soul wasn't filled, just my bank account was. And I've learned a lot of things that like impact how I lead. And that whole started with I was awful to myself, awful. And so some of the things that are taught out there about like self healing and self help, entrepreneurs can learn to listen to more of that.
Yeah, that is something important. I've learned that in the morning I mean, I wouldn't label myself as a Christian or anything like that, but I do love Christian music, like the praise and worship music.
Yeah.
And I listen to that in the morning with my cup of coffee, and it always, like you said, feeds my soul and prepares me for having interaction in the world when I go out there, or interaction with my team. There's something about, and I think is there a thing that you do, is there like a morning routine or something that you do that feeds your soul, or is there something you do every day? Because I think that's regardless of whether, I know you have, you're Christian, but regardless of that part, what do you think is important to feeding your soul?
Just because someone says they're Christian doesn't mean they do things for self, healing and help. And so what I do, gosh, I would have loved to have known this sooner. I guard my mornings. Like, I had to disrupt my morning. Now, when people hear this, they're going to hear it when it's launched out. But this actually, because you and I had to figure out our time, disrupted part of my morning. So what I did is I started to change that last night. But every day in my morning, I protect it. And so what does that mean? I get up, I do things like hydrate, put water in my body. I start to do things like what happened yesterday that I'm thankful for. I start getting grounded in today. Like, what am I going to do? I spend a lot of time. For me, my meditation looks like prayer. It looks like
Mhm.
worship. For other
Yeah.
people, it can be mindfulness and clearing your mind. And like, again, my journey to Christ doesn't mean that everyone else has to be on that journey. That's mine. And so when I sit there and share that, I'm finding a way to get simple and solitude so I can deal with the rumblings of my soul.
No, I love that. And I love how you phrase that, because like, everybody has their journey that they're going down, that they're going on and walking through. So before we close, I want to get into the CEO's mindset, that book, because you have something, it says how to break through to the next level.
Yeah. We hate that title, by the way.
I actually liked it. I was like, maybe I need to, maybe there's something in here. It was like I don't know if you could word it as a question, but to me, that's what it popped out as. It's like a question, like, what does that look like, for me in my life to getting to that? How can I be a better person? I think that's the
That
key.
was the whole idea behind it, Jason, was like, at the time, the reason why my team, and rightfully so, doesn't like that subtitle is it's not descriptive. So as marketers, we make big mistakes with coming up with these cute terms that aren't
Mhm.
descriptive. It can go in so many directions. So it's unclear. And since it's unclear, it's not simple. Now, forgetting all that drama for a second, the intention behind it was help you go inward so that you can go upward.
Mm. What now? Like, what are the processes in that? Like, when you outlined in the book, specifically, what are some of the things of how you can start? If it's an inward book and dealing with yourself, what are some of the things that you can start doing?
Yeah, you start realizing your talents. Instead of like getting better at your weaknesses, you can guard art of war, guard against your weaknesses, bring in other people to do those things, right? So it's going to be more than a team of one, or accept the fact that you only want to be a team of one. Like, get real with yourself about what are so important to you. What's your mission? What are the values that you stand for? If you go to Fully Accountable and look at our About Us and look at our core values, you'll get a snapshot of me. And so
Mm.
that's an inward thing. And then I use that as a way to either stop people or draw people in, meaning you'll hear all the time people say, "Oh my gosh, I love dealing with your team. They're great." Well, if you listen to the language, even though technically they're doing something else, they are a DNA of me, because we have some of those core value sets that are so critically important. And then if we're not connected, then we're actually, since I'm the heartbeat of our organization, we're going to have a heart attack if we're not kind of all beating together. And so people do different things. There are technical experts who do stuff. But I'll be honest with you, you can be super technical, amazing at what you do. But if you're a cultural misfit, you get one thing around here. Do you know what that is?
What is that?
Fired.
That is so. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. How can you be so bold in putting your DNA into the company? I think a lot of people would be afraid to do that.
Um, I realized that one of the best gifts I could do was to do that. One of the best things I could do to be loving to other people was, when I let someone go from the team, I do it. And when you're walking into the room, before you're even sitting down, I say, hey, before this conversation ends, I'm going to be letting you go from the team, but let's talk about it. And so this idea of openness, I was raised in lots of things where you postured, you put this vision of
Yes.
yourself up, you put a big vision up that wasn't true of you. And so some of this journey started with me fixing that. And then I realized that one of the most loving things I can do is have a place where people are comfortable living life. I chose relationship. And as a result of that, relationships are messy. They have to be open. They have to communicate. And love requires me to invest in the time to want things to be better. And so all of that led to me wanting a massively open environment because I wanted to overcome some things that weren't. So I do this at my home. I do this in our business. I do this in our community. This, I am so thankful, is the cadence of the way I lead.
No, that's awesome. And I know for sake of time, I could talk to you for hours, Vinny, and I appreciate, number one, your humility and being open and honest and allowing a part of your heart to be shared with my listeners. One of the things that I think is going to be a tremendous help in this podcast is the way that you've talked about being able to kind of wrangle, if you want to use that word, that creative mind. I know we have a lot of creative people out there that are leading, and there's a struggle with that, and then how to execute on ideas. I just appreciate it's I hate to use the word rare, but it is when you're talking with somebody and you can see somebody just being who they are. And I know that's taken a lot of years of work, and I just want to commend you and appreciate you. And then thank you also for the gifts. And if you could mention that again for
Well, I would love. First off, thank you for the compliment. I really do accept that and recognize it, and it's the mission that I'm on, and I'm massively passionate for other leaders and this idea of finding a way to feed our souls. What's our purpose? What are we doing? How are we checking the box in the things that we do in our life? And so you can find out way more about that and leading and all the things that of the gifts that I want to give you at fullyaccountable.com/ABQ, and is yours. Please take advantage of it. I'm not doing that to get rich in books. I'm giving it to you for free. And so I'm doing that because I would love to get rid of the chip on my shoulder where I had to do it all by myself.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think I think that like by yourself. I love that. Everybody in chip on your shoulder. That's a powerful statement. And I appreciate you sharing that and saying that. Vinny, once again, it was a true joy to have you on the podcast. And I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.